It's about to get interesting, so subscribe and hit like so you don't miss the top content.
I never believed that love could change a life. At least that's what I thought before everything changed. My name is Alex, and I live in a small town somewhere in the American Midwest. Everything here seems frozen in time, the same streets, the same people, the same endless fields stretching out over the horizon. Life here flows slowly, like a river that has long since forgotten where it should flow, and I seem to have become part of this landscape, a person who simply exists but doesn't live. I once believed in love, believed that it could be stronger than anything else in the world, that it could overcome any obstacle, but it's all in the past. Along with the person who walked away and left me with an emptiness inside. Her name was Emily. We were together for 5 years, and I thought it was forever. But one day she simply told me that she didn't love me anymore, that her feelings had faded away like a fall leaf that falls to the ground never to return to the branch again. I didn't argue, didn't beg her to stay. I just closed the door behind her and realized that I never wanted to feel that pain again. 3 years have passed since then. I've become a different person, someone who avoids intimacy, who won't even let himself think about letting someone back into his heart. I work at the local library, where silence and dusty books have become my only companions. Sometimes I catch myself thinking that I like this solitude. It's safe, it won't cheat, it won't betray, it won't leave, but deep down, I know it's not life, it's just existence. And then one day, everything changed. It was an ordinary day. No different from any other day. I was sitting at my desk in the library, sorting through the new arrivals, when the door opened and a flood of sunlight burst into the room. I looked up and saw her. She was the complete opposite of me, bright, smiling, like the embodiment of life itself. Her name was Sophia. She had just moved to our town from New York, and she needed to sign up at the library. I remember her coming up to me, her eyes glowing with curiosity and warmth. She spoke quickly, as if she was afraid time would slip away if she slowed down. I listened to her, but I didn't hear her. My heart, long closed to the world, didn't want to let her in, but she didn't seem to notice my coldness. She smiled, joked, talked about how much she liked our little town, how excited she was to start a new life here. I didn't understand how anyone could be so open, so carefree. It annoyed me, but at the same time it gave me a strange feeling that I couldn't explain. Sophia started coming to the library every day. At first I thought it was just random, but then I realized that she was seeking my company. She asked questions about books, about the city, about my life. I answered one-word answers, trying to keep my distance, but she didn't seem to notice. She kept smiling, kept being there for me, and gradually I began to notice that her presence had become something important to me. I didn't want to admit it, but something inside me began to change. Her energy, her cheerfulness, began to penetrate the walls I had so carefully built around me. I caught myself waiting for her to come, wondering what she would say today, what books she would choose, what stories she would tell. And though I was still afraid to let her into my life, I realized that she was already a part of it. One day she brought her camera with her. She said she loved taking pictures and wanted to capture the beauty of our town. She asked me to show her the most interesting places. I wanted to refuse, but something inside me gave in. We spent the whole day together, walking the streets that I had known since childhood, but which suddenly took on new colors thanks to her gaze. She took pictures of old buildings, trees, clouds, and I could see her savoring every moment. I couldn't understand how one could be so happy just from being alive. By the end of the day, I felt something inside of me break. The wall I had spent so long building had cracked. I didn't want it. I was afraid of it, but I couldn't help it. Sophia became the light that began to penetrate my darkness, and though I wasn't ready to admit it yet, I knew my life would never be the same again. It had been a few weeks since Sophia had appeared in my life. She seemed to burst into it with such force that I couldn't imagine my days without her smile, her laughter, her endless questions that made me think about things I had long forgotten. She was like a fresh wind that dispersed the clouds that hung over my heart, and though I still resisted, still tried to keep my distance, I felt like I was losing control of myself. She came to the library almost every day, and each time she brought something new with her, a book she had read overnight and wanted to discuss, or photos she had taken the day before. She talked about her dreams, about how she wanted to travel, to see the world, to capture its beauty. I listened to her, And for the first time in a long time I felt that my life, so gray and monotonous, was beginning to take on new colors. One day she suggested that I go with her to a lake outside the city. I wanted to refuse, as I always did, but she looked at me with her big, warm eyes, and I couldn't say no. We drove in her old car, which she affectionately called Betty. It was a long drive, but she filled it with conversation, music, and laughter. I sat next to her and thought about how strange it was to feel alive after so many years in a daze. The lake turned out to be beautiful. The water was clear and clean, and all around stretched vast forests that seemed endless. Sophia immediately ran to the water, took off her shoes and waded into the lake, laughing and screaming with delight. I stood on the shore watching her and felt something inside me melt. She turned around, waved her hand at me and shouted, "Alex, come here. Life is too short to stand on the shore." I don't know what came over me, but I followed her. The water was cold, but it didn't matter. I looked at her smile, at her eyes that shone like the sun, and I felt something inside me come alive. She took my hand and said, "See how beautiful the world is? You've just forgotten about it, but I'm going to help you remember." We spent several hours together that day. We swam, walked in the woods, and talked about life. She told me about her travels, the people she'd met, the places she'd seen. I listened to her and realized that my life, so narrow and limited, suddenly began to seem too small. She opened the door to a world I had long ago closed to me. By the time we got back to town, it was late. She drove me home, and before I got out of the car, she looked at me and said, "Thank you for being with me today. You made this day special." I wanted to say something back, but the words stuck in my throat. I just nodded and got out of the car. I sat at the window for a long time that night, looking up at the stars. I thought about Sophia, about how she had changed my life in such a short time. I thought about how she made me feel things I had long forgotten, and though I was still afraid, still doubting, I realized that I couldn't go back to the life I'd led before. She was the light I had been searching for so long without even realizing it. From then on, we spent more and more time together. She took me for walks, showed me places I'd never noticed, taught me to see the beauty in the little things, and I, though I resisted, began to change. Her energy, her love of life began to penetrate me, and I felt my heart, long closed and cold, begin to thaw. But with that came fear. Fear that I might lose what I was beginning to feel again. Fear that she would leave, like Emily left, and leave me with an even greater emptiness. I tried to fight that fear, but it was stronger than me, and the closer we got, the more afraid I became. One night, as we were sitting at her house watching a movie, I suddenly realized that I couldn't hide my feelings anymore. I turned to her and said, "Sophia, I don't know how to say this, but you changed my life. You made me feel again something I had long forgotten, and I'm afraid that if you leave, I won't be able to handle it." She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw understanding. She took my hand and said, "Alex, I can't promise that I'll always be there for you, but I can promise that while I'm here, I'll do whatever I can to make you feel happy. You're not alone, and you deserve to be happy." Her words were a revelation to me. I realized that life is not only pain and disappointment, it is also moments of happiness that are worth appreciating, and although the fear had not gone away, I decided that I would no longer hide from life. Sophia became the person who helped me believe in love, in myself, in the world again, and I knew that despite all my fears, I wanted to be with her. Things were going too well to last forever. I began to notice that Sophia sometimes became pensive, her smile losing its former brightness and a shadow in her eyes that I couldn't understand. She still spent time with me, laughing, telling stories, but sometimes I would catch her gaze staring off into nowhere, like she was somewhere far away. I wanted to ask her what was going on, but I stopped myself every time. Maybe it's just my paranoia, I thought. Maybe I'm just afraid of losing her, and that's why I'm seeing things that aren't there. But then one day, everything changed. We were sitting in a cafe on the outskirts of town, drinking coffee and talking about plans for the future. Sophia was telling me that she wanted to go to California to photograph the ocean. She spoke with such enthusiasm that I couldn't help but smile. But then her voice shook, and she suddenly stopped talking. I looked at her and saw that her eyes had filled with tears. "Sophia, what's wrong?" I asked, feeling anxiety clutching my heart. She was silent for a long time, and then she said, "Alex, I need to tell you something. I didn't want to tell you before, but I can't keep quiet anymore." It was like the world around me stopped. I felt the blood drain from my face, and my chest felt heavy. Something told me this wasn't going to be good news. "I'm leaving," she said quietly, not looking at me. "In 2 weeks, I have to go back to New York." I couldn't believe my ears. It was like a blow under my breath. I sat there trying to comprehend her words, but they wouldn't fit in my head. How could she leave? Why? We were just starting to build something, just starting to find each other. I wanted to ask her why she hadn't told me sooner, but instead I just mumbled, "For how long?" She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw pain. "I don't know," she replied. "Maybe forever." The word sounded like a sentence. Forever. It echoed in my head, and I felt something inside me crumble. I wanted to scream, to ask her why she was doing this, but instead I just sat there, unable to utter a word. Sophia took my hand and said, "Alex, I don't want to lose you. You've become very important to me, but I have obligations that I can't ignore. I have to come back." "What kind of commitment?" I asked, feeling the anger and pain mix inside me. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" She lowered her eyes and said, "I was afraid that if I told you, you'd push me away, and I didn't want to lose what we have." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I would never push her away, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I simply asked, "What's the commitment?" She sighed and said, "I have a son. He's 5 years old. He lives with my parents in New York. I left here to start a new life, but I can't leave him." It was like the world turned upside down around me. She had a son? Why didn't she ever talk about it? I felt anger and resentment fill me. Why did she keep it from me? Why let me believe we had a future if she knew she could leave at any moment? "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, and my voice sounded sharper than I wanted it to. "I was afraid," she repeated. "Afraid you wouldn't understand. Afraid it would change everything." "That's what changes everything," I said, feeling the pain and disappointment overwhelm me. "You should have told me from the beginning." She looked at me, and I saw tears in her eyes. "I know I did, and I'm sorry, but I don't want to lose you. Alex, you've become important to me. I don't want that to end." I wanted to say that I didn't want this to end either, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just got up and walked out of the cafe, leaving her alone. I walked down the street, not knowing where I was going, feeling the pain and anger tearing me apart. I didn't know what to do, how to live with it. She had become everything to me, and now I realized I could lose her. When I got home, I sat in the dark for a long time, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. She has a son. She's leaving, maybe forever. I could feel my heart, which had just started to thaw, being covered in ice again. I didn't want to feel that pain again. I didn't want to be abandoned again. But at the same time, I realized that I couldn't just let her go. She had become a part of my life, a part of me, and even though I was angry, even though I felt betrayed, I knew I couldn't just forget her. The next morning, I decided to talk to her. I walked to her house and knocked on the door. She opened and I saw that her eyes were swollen with tears. She looked like she hadn't slept all night. "I don't want to lose you," I said before she could say anything, "but you have to realize that it hurts. You should have told me sooner." She nodded and said, "I know, and I'm sorry, but I don't want to lose you. Alex, you've become important to me." We stood in front of each other, and I could feel the wall I had started to build around me crumbling again. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know how we were going to get past this, but I knew I didn't want to let her go. "Let's try," I said, feeling fear and hope struggling inside me. "Let's try to find a way out." She smiled through her tears and nodded. In that moment, I realized that love isn't just happiness. It's also pain, fear, doubt, but it's worth it, because it changed my life, and I don't want to lose that. It's been months since Sophia told me about her son. Those months were filled with a mixture of pain, hope, and trying to find common ground. We both realized that our future hung in the balance, but neither of us were ready to just let go of each other. We decided to give it a try, to try to make it so that our love could overcome distance, obligations, and fears. Sophia went to New York as she had planned. She went back to her son, whose name was Jacob. I'd seen pictures of him. He was a carbon copy of his mother, with the same bright eyes and a smile that could melt ice. She called me every day, telling me how they were spending their time, how Jacob was asking about me. I could feel myself slowly starting to accept her past, her life that she kept from me. It wasn't easy, but I realized that if I wanted to be with her, I had to accept everything about her. We decided that I would come to see them. It was a scary decision to leave my small town, my job, my comfort zone, but I knew that if I didn't, I would lose her forever, and I couldn't let that happen. When I arrived in New York, I was greeted by a completely different Sophia. She was still the same cheerful, open, but now there was also a shadow of weariness in her eyes. Motherhood, work, trying to make a life for herself. It had all taken its toll, but when she saw me, her eyes lit up with the light I'd come to love. Jacob turned out to be an amazing kid. He was curious, funny, and accepted me right away. We hit it off quickly, and I realized that he was as naturally a part of my life as his mother was. We spent time together, walking in parks, going to museums, and I could feel myself gradually fitting into their world. But not everything was perfect. There were moments when I felt like an outsider, when I realized I couldn't replace Jacob's father, who, as it turned out, had long since disappeared from their lives. There were moments when Sophia and I argued, when fear and uncertainty took over, but we learning to be together, learning to trust each other, learning to love despite the odds. One night, as the three of us sat on the couch watching a movie, Jacob suddenly turned to me and said, "Alex, will you stay with us?" His question caught me off guard. I looked at Sophia and she was smiling, but there was worry in her eyes. I realized this was the moment of truth. "Yes, Jacob," I said, feeling something inside me finally fall into place. "I'm staying with you, forever." Sophia took my hand, and I saw her eyes fill with tears. In that moment, I realized that love isn't just happiness and joy, it's also responsibility, hardship, compromise, but it's worth it, because she changed my life, and I changed hers. Now we live together in New York City. We have our difficulties, our arguments, but we also have a love that helps us overcome everything. Jacob calls me Daddy, and every time I hear that word, I feel my heart fill with warmth. Sophia has become my home, my support, my love. I am no longer the person who became disillusioned with love and closed my heart. I learned to believe again. I learned to feel again, and it's all thanks to her, thanks to Sophia, who burst into my life one day and changed it forever. Love is a risk. It's pain, fear, doubt, but it's also happiness, which is worth fighting for, and I'm grateful to fate for giving me the chance to believe in it again.